Hey, happy Monday! Welcome back to the show, and we got a really deep topic here tonight that I want to get into. We're 15 days away from the election. Less than, what is it? We can call it 2 weeks now at this point, at this time of the hour. 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. Wherever else you guys are listening from, it's basically tomorrow. So we're 2 weeks away. Let's just say. And you know what's funny is one of the things I think a lot of people are most guilty of is wishful thinking. And I myself, I'm guilty of that too. I really am. And I really thought this time around, coming after the 2020 election and how it was stolen, I thought to myself, there's no way that all of these, voting machines, these Dominion machines, and all these other things can break down again. There can't be, those kind of issues again. They're not going to do that again. And I had wishful thinking. I'm guilty of it too. I'm guilty of that, and I really did. And then, it was always in the back of my mind, though, because they did steal it. But I think going into this election now that's, 2 weeks away, 15 days for all of you technical people, this coming out about rumors now in places like Georgia, Pennsylvania, now Tennessee, that have become the latest states to report instances of election fraud, including these fucking Dominion voting systems. Allegedly, they're now flipping votes. These machines are now doing that. So, we know that because of the multiple states, this isn't isolated incidents. We've heard this trick before. So I figured, what the heck? I'm done with wishful thinking, at least for a little while. And I'm going to. That's why tonight we're going to be talking about warding off attempts to steal the 2024 election. So it's going to be a pretty thick show tonight, folks. I'm going to do the best I can to kind of explain, the 12th Amendment, kind of getting into that, how we elect a president and a vice president, and the ratification of that in 1804. And then I'm going to go into some of the past things that have occurred to kind of refresh some memories out there. And then what I really want to look at is how states and their individual liberties can get involved in the election process as they have before. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we all know that the Dems worked harder than an ugly stripper to see that the election was corrupt and that the election was going to be stolen from Donald Trump. And but now with some of the new the voter laws that came up in 2022, I want to kind of address those because I have a feeling, again, no more wishful thinking, that there's a hide behind here. So we're going to be talking about it on the other side. See you in a minute.
Break 'em on. This is America First Radio. Patriots, get your ears on because we're blowing the speakers out.
Lefty G. It is time for the Lefty G Show. The only show to get you right. Get ready to get right with Lefty. Your voice taking you down Freedom Road. Now, here's your host, Lefty G.
Let's hit the fucking road!
All right, welcome back to the show. Happy Monday, everybody. And so this is it. This is what I want to kind of get into. We're going to be talking about literally warding off new attempts, as I see it, to steal the 2024 presidential election, again, from Donald Trump. So look this up. I want to start addressing amendments a little bit more clearly in moving on as far as myself being a constitutionalist in future shows. But because we have such a thick show tonight, I'm going to leave it up to you guys to really look up the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. And this is, as I said, was ratified on the 15th of June, 1804. And it revises and outlines the procedure of how presidents and vice presidents are elected, specifically so that they're elected at the same time. Pretty interesting read on the 12th Amendment, and we'll get into that. But and again, if the show wasn't so thick tonight, I would definitely spend more time on it. But we're going to get rolling here. So I want to take you down a little bit of history lane here on what happened in 2020, leading up to that election, and some of the things I think that are going to refresh your memory as far as what happened in the procedure and processes of the election process. But I also want to address, some of the individual liberties and states' rights that individual states have, and how I think some of the Dems are going to use those as an end around or a hide around, with corruption, of course, with other political officials, maybe even some governors that I have suspicion on, that they could steal the election. And I think it's going to be kind of an interesting. So kind of bear with me. I'm going to work, as I said, I'm going to work harder than an ugly stripper to try to get this message out to you folks. But go ahead and look up the 12th Amendment. I think it's pretty interesting to this conversation here as far as how we elect. And again, I'm not going to get into anything really past the 2020 election. I'm going to try not to, because if you remember in 2000 when Al Gore, the climate change fucking whack job, when he lost to George W. Bush, again, all the dummy crap started screaming about the electoral process, with how the popular vote. I think that was the first time we ever heard that they wanted to get rid of the Electoral College, which, yes, that's another show for another day of why the Electoral College is so important. I will get to that one. A lot of stuff happened, and I just needed to address this here. So let's get going. So going to the fraud that happened in the 2020 election, you've heard it time and time again, where it was said that, it has often been repeated, I should say, that there is no evidence of fraud in the 2020 election. But in all actuality, what I'd like to say is, there's no evidence that Joe Biden actually won. Show me the evidence where he won. I know that even to this day, reflecting back to the 2020 election and what we're getting into now in 2024, there are still some areas of the country that have an ongoing investigation into the swing states. And what they're finding, even to this date, is that they're revealing hundreds of thousands of votes that were altered and or not lawfully cast in the presidential election. So what was speculation and kind of soft proof and becoming harder proof at the time of the election is now completely out there in the open that it was a ripoff. Joe Biden really needed this criminal activity. On election night of November 3rd, 2020. Now again, we're coming up to the 5th for our election, but in 2024. But November 3rd, 2020 was the election night. And on election night of November 3rd, 2020, President Donald Trump at the time was sailing easily to re-election with a landslide leads in numerous battleground states. In Georgia, President Trump was up by 12 points, over 335,000 votes, with 56% of the votes in at 10:17 p.m. Okay, in Wisconsin, President Trump was leading by 121,000 or over 121,000 votes and 5 points at 12:12 a.m. Which Fox News anchor, I can't remember the guy's name now, but I can't remember the guy's name, Brett Baer maybe, I think it was, check on that. He noted was a pretty small margin, but they were pretty much giving the win over to Trump at that time. And then in Pennsylvania, President Trump was leading by like 660,000 votes. It was a fucking crazy amount. And it was like after midnight and a full 15, 16, whatever, 15 points, whatever it was. But then again, in Michigan, President Trump was leading by over 290,000 votes and like 10 points. And so we're gonna go back and discuss some of those states right now, as in here in a minute, and we're going to readdress some of the things that they did previously to steal the election, and then we're going to look at some of these individual states and how they can use even their local governments to overturn elections results and even mess with the process in a very strange legalese type of way. And again, I'm going to do the very best I can to explain it to everybody. But my point is, back in 2020, with everything I just mentioned, the election was over. It was in the bag for Donald Trump. And however, different precincts in places like Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Michigan, they kept counting until the results reached the quote-unquote fucking desired outcome, if you know what I'm trying to say, which was the opposite, literally, point blank, the opposite of the will of all the voters. Georgia went from having a total of like 4.7 million votes, already a record for that state at that time, and Georgia went from having that many votes, according to, again, all the different pundits, all the different people that were commenting. This was back on November 4th, mind you. November 3rd, 2020 was the election, to certify almost 5 million. That was in Georgia. This was 300,000 more votes than what the top election officials claimed were cast in the election. So think about that. Now, getting to this result in Georgia and other states created, as you guys remember, a feeling that there was definitely a compromised election. We had one after the other violations of the Constitution. We had unlawful ballots. We had widespread broken chains of custody. We had electronic manipulation and missing the corrupted election files that made it uncertifiable and impossible to recreate the results, conveniently enough. And I think President Trump was right to voice his objections. Actually, I don't want to say I think. I know he was, to voice his objections to what had unfolded, really before the entire country's eyes. And a lot of Republican poll watchers were denied access to the counting in multiple jurisdictions, and ballots were counted in secret right in the middle of the fucking night, if you guys remember all this, without any type of media or any type of observers present. Now think about this. Could you imagine if Democrat people were not allowed into different areas where the ballots were being counted and no media or any type of observers were present? Could you imagine the absolute chaos that would ensue? And so we all know this, right? This was kind of what happened, and we all witnessed this, and people were outraged, and there was a lot of these so-called, they keep using the word irregularities. I don't know. Why don't you just say fucking theft? Why don't you say, but there was a lot of these irregularities that emerged, including reports of illegible, not illegible, but non-eligible voters. There were all these voting machine anomalies. Remember, they were talking to all these IT professionals and these software designers. The one that I loved was the water main break. Remember, they said that there were so many ballots that were basically stuffed in the sewer that there was a water main break. Look that up. That's a pretty good one. And there was, all these improbable percentages of ballots for Biden and more that came after the fact. We all of a sudden, mysteriously, when Trump was way ahead, everything kind of shut down. You remember all that? And then they were counting into the mornings, and all of a sudden, voila, they found a shit ton of more votes for Biden, which is, complete bullshit. And since the investigations across the country have uncovered an avalanche of irregularities, unlawful activity, manipulation of election records, destruction of evidence, and fraud, the findings, which are more of an outcome, really a determinative outcome, are detailed in the summaries of different swing states. And I'm going to touch on a couple of those, and I previously mentioned them. So, if we were to look at what happened in Georgia, now this stuff really kind of made me sick. When I was looking this up and I was kind of reading through a lot of this stuff, I really couldn't believe, I had forgotten a lot of this. Again, maybe it goes back to wishful thinking. Maybe it goes back to too many beer hops and bong resin in my head. Who the fuck knows? Too many knocks in the head for my older brothers and sisters. But I think the thing is that, I was shocked at what I came across in all of this. So in Georgia, to start there, not a single ballot that was cast during the early in-person voting was witnessed and signed off on by poll managers. And that's required by Georgia election rules. Seals were broken and memory cards removed from the tabulators for the results of these, over 300,000 votes, which were printed out of on different machines than the ones that tabulated them, the ones that were legally required to be used. And this prevented the reconciliation of how many votes were cast on each machine. Not to mention in Georgia, another one that was a good one was the ballot images of these votes, along with the rest of the in-person ballots cast on Election Day, were destroyed. They were destroyed. So, that happened. And then, of course, in Wisconsin, another state that fucked with the election process, if you guys remember, their Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin ruled that these drop boxes, remember those things that were all over the place? These drop boxes were illegal under Wisconsin law in a 4-3 decision issued in July of 2022. But the Wisconsin election commissioner at that time unilaterally declared ballot drop boxes could be used to vote in the 2020 elections, completely circumventing the Supreme Court that had that rule, even though they ruled it, she or he, I can't remember what it was, overturned it, and the commissioners never voted to adopt this memo. So there it was, and that was what happened in Wisconsin. Also, another thing that happened was ahead of the November 2020 election, the folks, there was this, I can't remember her, Megan Wolf. That was maybe she was the one. She was the election commissioner at the time. That's who it was. She urged the clerks to use creative solutions. She urged them to use creative solutions to deploy drop boxes. Now, remember, again, the Wisconsin Supreme Court said were not allowed to be used. But she wanted them to use creative solutions to deploy drop boxes that she said could be unstaffed. There were, I think, over 500 drop boxes used in the general election, and a total of, I don't know, like fucking almost 2 million absentee votes cast, including like another 1.5 million votes cast by mail. And then whatever it was, whatever that remainder is, like 650,000 in person. So there was all of that happening in Wisconsin. Then, of course, let's go back to the one that made a lot of the news, was this Pennsylvania deal. Months after the election, there were over 120,000 more votes than voters, according to the Pennsylvania Department of State. So figure that. And by law, Pennsylvania cannot certify an election with these types of discrepancies. But they went ahead and they did it anyways. In Philadelphia, hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots were unlawfully counted in secret. There we go again. In defiant of a court order. But, Wisconsin, said the Supreme Court, go fuck yourself, and why not? Court order, and I guess in Pennsylvania, is about as fluid. But, and here's the thing, again, in Pennsylvania, when they defied this court order, these Republican poll watchers were thrown out of the building where voting took place. Now, imagine that. They were tossed out of the building. And you know what? There you have it. There was a lawsuit that was filed in the Delaware County that revealed video evidence. Remember, this was the one that really got everybody talking about the shit that happened in Pennsylvania. And this one revealed video evidence of election officials discussing destroying election evidence from the November 2020 election. And a lot of them were saying stuff like, it's a felony, and the other one said, get rid of, voting pads and second scanners and all of this stuff going back and forth. It was literally on video, and sources involved in the litigation alleged the Delaware County officials violated numerous, and they did violate numerous election laws, and that the destruction of records was done to ensure records eventually provided actually matched the election results that were reported in November of 2020. So they were essentially destroying documents that would have shown Donald Trump as the winner unequivocally. Arizona, who can forget all that shit about Maricopa County? Maricopa County, that's what we heard about forever. They accepted over 21,000 mail-in ballots after the election day of 2020, including about 18 or 20,000 more than the entire election margin. I think it was like on November 4th. Now, remember, it was November 3rd, 2020 was election day. So here we are on November 4th in Arizona. They picked them all up from the U.S. Postal Service. And by law, ballots must be received no later than 7 p.m. on election day, which was, again, November 3rd. That's what happened there in Maricopa County. That made all the news. But again, in sticking with Arizona is, there was this election integrity group. They were called True the Vote. They identified more than 202 ballot traffickers in Maricopa County who made over 4,000 individual drop box visits during the 2020 general elections. Again, drop boxes in a lot of states don't use them, but you know what? They used them anyways. And to stick with Arizona, I know that there were 2 individuals that were charged and pled guilty for ballot harvesting in Yuma County, Arizona during the 2020 primary elections. This is where they interviewed, and I think you saw this guy or heard him on the radio, and saw him on some different shows. A computer scientist testified that an algorithm similar to what is used on cruise control, for all these self-driving cars, was presently affecting the early votes in the what they call Pima and Maricopa counties, I believe it was. Pima, I think, was the other one, in the 2020 general election, with the ability to reach and maintain predetermined set points, or an outcome, in other words, despite unplanned disturbances. That was this guy's entire quote. And, so even he's admitting to the fact that they were put in a position to steal this election. And then finally, in Michigan, As of December of 2023, now again, not that long ago, Michigan has, I want to say it was over 272,000 more votes than the number of voters listed in its qualified voter file for November 3rd, 2020. More than 1.5 times the election margin in Michigan. So, I mean, it's evident. It's not even something that's a speculation. There's documented evidence that that election was stolen. So I don't think they're going to try the same tactics again because, we're too smart. We paid too attention. But I do think the reason, the whole point about the show here tonight is to really discuss, what can individual states do to try to circumvent, and actually be corroborative, I should say, with the Democrats in potentially trying to steal this election. And I think we have to be very sober-minded about the fact that the people who would steal the election, again, like in 2020, have had 4 years to prepare for this again. A lot of planning. And the people who would want to take advantage of these legal loopholes in the states have been working at it for 4 years. They have a desired outcome that they want, and again, they're gonna work as hard as here I go again, ugly stripper to make sure that they get the results, and the people's will be damned. So now let's get into, we've done a little history lesson. I kind of refreshed some of your memories about what happened in 2020. Now let's go take a look and talk about these individual states. And again, we may touch on the past election because that might fit in here. I'm just kind of winging this one to the present one that's coming up in 15 days. So let me step back here really quick and present some legal rights these states have. And again, I'm not an attorney. I don't pretend to be one on TV. But what I'm saying right now is there are some identified, legalese and legal rights that these individual states have. So look them up yourself. You'll be able to see this. But they're legal avenues that these states can use to overturn elections. And let us consider, for a moment, the hypothetical. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm not saying this is a rumor. I'm spitballing here. But let's take into account here the hypothetical instance of a state legislature, right? Let's just say we have a legislature somewhere out there in a state. Pick the state. Before Election Day, just declaring there won't be an election day. There it is. In their state, they could say this, or if there is an election day at all, that those states won't decide the electors. The states meaning, will themselves decide. So, in every presidential election, each state certifies its results and appoints electors who meet in the mid-December to cast votes for president and vice president. The electors, 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 send certificates of their presidential electoral votes to the federal government. Congress then meets on January 6th of the new year to count the electoral votes. So, and again, a little bit going backwards here. Starting in 1887, the Electoral Count Act governed the procedures for counting presidential electoral votes. What happened was, in 2022, the Electoral Count Reform Act modified those rules, including by clarifying that the vice president's constitutional role of opening electoral votes certifies for counting doesn't include the power to unilaterally reject votes. And if you guys remember, this was a position Pence maintained even before the new law was placed into effect. And this has always been really fishy to me because, Pence, I believe, was in on the fix. I think in 2020 that he precisely did what the 2022, Electoral Count Reform Act did 2 years later. It's a little fucking fishy to me. Look into that one. You'll enjoy it. So the state legislature will then themselves pick the slate of electors. There you have it. And I think most constitutionalists, myself included as one of them, think that that would actually be completely constitutional. But I think most non-lawyers look at that and say, that's just outrageous. I could see where even a lot of people would look at that. But however, I understand it from a constitutional standpoint. But as I started the show out with wishful thinking, I don't know. I got some questions on the whole thing. But back to the point. Even if the local officials did try to reverse an election using the means that I'm kind of laying out here, they very well could fail. A statewide election administrator or, say, a governor could intervene, and the courts would block efforts to overturn the results, just as they rejected dozens of lawsuits filed by Trump, if you remember, and all the other Republican allies that he had, and even some independent allies in 2020. So they were able to step in individually and do this. So the new law also requires Congress to honor the state's certification unless a court has ordered it to be modified. With, they got some kind of an expedited process for federal courts to hear disputes and blah, blah, blah. A lot there. Look it up yourself. But as I said before, funny that this Reform Act came out in 2022 when the Senate was dominated by Democrats in 2022, 2 years after Pence did exactly what that Reform Act said it was supposed to do. That's why I think that old Pencil Neck was definitely in on the fix. I never liked that guy. But to the point to focus on is the fact that at least 40 states, maybe as much as 42 states, have effectively done that by deciding that all electoral votes will go to the winner of the popular vote. Because what that means is that in states that are not the swing states, the campaign just doesn't really matter. And we know today, how at least 40 states will decide on election day. We kind of know that. So through what we're talking about here is we have to recognize kind of the culture and the environment that we're definitely in. And I hope you guys are following me. I did my research. I'm doing the best I can to explain this, and I know I'm fairly accurate. So look into it yourself. Actually, I'm very accurate. But let's look at the environment that we're in and why this matters coming up to 15 days out. Through the violent events of, say, the mid to late 2022, early 2021. I knew I said I wasn't going to go backwards in time, but I did say I might have to. And by the way, all those events were all manufactured by the Dems. The BLM riots, the overhyped January 6, 2021 protest. These events continue to reverberate across the political spectrum. They're being brought up even today. And I want to warn everyone that, besides the corruption, perfectly legal avenues still exist for overturning election results in these states. And that's what I'm trying to get through to everyone, that they have these legal rights. I'm concerned that they're going to be manipulated for gross overreach and corruption. Because there are still holes that could be exploited, however. I just want to say that. There's still loopholes, especially at the local level of each one of these states. Some of those holes are already being tested by local officials, such as refusing to certify elections at the county level. There was a guy, his name was Matthew Siegelman, I believe his name was, a fellow at Stanford's Constitutional Law Center who reported on that. So the thing that I'm trying to get out here is, due to the changes in the Electoral Count Reform Act, the effort has shifted to try to get county boards of elections and then potentially state-level boards of elections to have some kind of authority to refuse to certify election results. Now, you can see where that could be a very slippery slope, and that's what I'm trying to point out to you. This is my tea leaf prediction of what's going to happen if they do decide to rip us off. And so, with the United States of America being a constitutional republic and not a democracy, we need to first understand, again, and I'm going to say it again, that these states, they have these individual legislative abilities and rights outside of the federal government. They can effectively self-govern in terms of elections and other things. Just take a look at the Roe versus Wade federal overturn, where the ruling went back to states to better understand examples of how rule of law on states' abilities to self-govern can happen. So there's one gross example outside of this topic. But one of the scariest things, and I say scary because it's more of a reflective piece back on me, but one of the scariest statistics about the January 6, 2021 so-called riot, which it wasn't, it was basically a fucking peaceful protest, at any rate, is basically the same number of people who think it was a stolen election today is the same number of people that thought it was stolen back on January 6, 2021. Which, the reason why I say it's scary is because that's the thing that hit me over the head that tells me it's got to be very true, which tells me a lot about the fact that there is truth to that process of thought. And again, what I meant by scary is, in fact, the election was stolen, and folks are sticking to their hardened beliefs, and quite honestly, I'm one of them. So, but going back to the point here, procedure changes in vote counting and election certification at the state and local levels, which I've heard folks say are meant to bolster confidence and accuracy in elections. Hence why I started the show tonight talking about wishful thinking. Remember that? Are now our battleground. This is our battleground that we are. This is where I believe the election is going to be, is controlling the corruption with the state's ability to overturn election results. That's what I'm saying. That's how I think the Democrats are going to steal this fucking thing. That's our battleground. And the main point of today's show is just that. I'm trying to do my best to convey to all of you that I think it's not going to be broken fucking machines and federal marshals standing in a warehouse scratching their nuts all night. It's going to literally be loopholes in individual state laws that can, with a little bit of corruption sprinkled in, that they can steal this fucking thing. And that's the point of the show tonight. This year has already seen last-minute rule changes from the Georgia State Election Board and commissioners in key Nevada swing county voting against certifying elections. We've already seen some movement on that. And the thing is, these, I'm going to call them misguided attempts by the state election board, will delay election results and undermine the chain of custody of the safeguards process for those ballots and those votes. This is how I'm thinking there's going to have this level of corruption. And all of these efforts are being propagated by the Democrats. You mark my words. The communist Democrats are the ones that are behind all of this. And I believe they're going to use the Voting Reform Act of 2022 as a hide behind for and of their upcoming corrupt dealings. And who knows? Maybe I'm just assuming stuff. Maybe they're going to be using payoffs and shit like that to cause local boards and possibly the governor, like fat ass Pritzker, to intervene if the election doesn't seem to be going the Dems' way. Which with Camel-Toe Harris running, I pretty much think they're already gearing up for a ripoff because she's not the vehicle that's going to get this anywhere. But the political movement that we're seeing that would take advantage of these illegal ongoings and legal loopholes is not fundamentally, but directly anti-American in her rooted method of all things, governance in all of its respects. And here's the thing, and this is why this is so dangerous, because it can go under the noses and not really get anyone to get me. It doesn't need to pass the smell test, because none of this reflects any particular policy position on things like taxes or trade or immigration or abortion. There's none of these hot ticket items. This is going to be an end around to just, again, use the states as a hide behind to steal the election. And it's an idea about a commitment to the preservation, the representative, I should say, preserving the representative system, or the absence of that commitment. And the best evidence that we all have that there's one political movement in the United States that lacks that commitment is quite literally the Democrats. What we saw happening in 2020 is what I'm referring to, and what I really believe is going to happen again here in 2024. And again, in 2020, the liberals propagated the unnecessary COVID pandemic, which killed 300,000 people. Again, the Black Lives Matter riots, millions of dollars in damages and deaths. They weaponized the FBI. There was election fraud that we're talking about. They are erasing history, meaning they're tearing down statues and desecrating museums, on and on and on and on and on. So rules and price and position is what my whole point is, mean nothing to this political group. It means nothing. And so them finding a loophole and a way to steal the election in the way that I'm trying to describe here is almost as obvious as 1 + 1 = 2. And this is why I'm on high alert of election fraud influenced by the Dems in states where those states can have legal loopholes to be manipulated via the legal system, via corruption. And I would say, moreover, corruption in the election process. And look, here's the thing. To kind of boil the water out of the pot here on this topic is we can't ever design an election system that is completely impervious to bad faith. It's not as if, say, James Madison, if he had lived long enough, he could have designed a system that perfectly balances everything like the perfectly designed clock, right? But we can narrow the window for bad faith actors to manipulate the system. And that's what I'm trying to do. We have to understand what it is that we're looking at here and what the potential danger and issues are. And to give one example, there's no reason that the electors should be voting, in my opinion, in the middle of December. That date should be moved back. And Congress can do that right now, but they're not. And I think, we think, oh, okay, well, it's an election year. How can there possibly be a law that passes Congress that in any way tinkers with the mechanics of the election system? And that's kind of what I'm talking about here, guys. I think there has to be another reform act to this thing. But this is something that's just not in the interests of the Democrats, quite honestly. And I would have to say some of the rhinos out there, some of the I would have to call them the corrupt Republicans. I would say that it's not in their interest either. But it's really in the interest of we the people. It's in the interest of anybody that doesn't want chaos. But we know from history, we know that the Democrats need chaos to justify their fucking existence. They can't stand on anything else. And I say this because you can look back in periods of American history in which, for example, I don't know, let's go all the way back to the antebellum period, through the Jim Crow period. It was a Democratic Party that was fundamentally anti-democratic, anti-constitutionalist, and anti-American way. And people forget that during those periods in history, the notion that bipartisanship was, the order of the day was not anywhere to be found with these people. And it's still the same way today. It's still the same way with these Democrats today. So history is literally repeating itself here again. And a really important issue that so much of what goes on in elections is not just a matter of strategy and manipulation by the candidates, but also the nuts and bolts of compliance. Election laws, as they fit into right and wrong, and truth and justice and the American way and all that kind of stuff. It can't be fluid or have any type of loopholes whatsoever. It has to be as tight as a frog's ass. And I would have to go back and I'd have to reach back to a non-American, but they're pretty wise here. I'd have to go back in the words of Niccolo Machiavelli, where he said, politics have no relation to morals. And I got to tell you, the Democrats are a party of zero morals. And I think it's important to recognize we're in a time of constitutional hardball. End of story. Which is why this is such a meaningful topic on election integrity. Elections matter. Elections have results. Obviously they have results, but elections have consequences. Those results have consequences. And I think we have to be aware of that and really embrace that. And again, I think I would take a moment to read the 12th Amendment to the Constitution on how we elect presidents and vice presidents. I would say look up your individual state's rights on their ability or lack thereof to overturn election results. I would say, do a little homework. Look into, the Election Reform Act of 2022. And again, be very suspicious about it. It's ironic that, this Reform Act came out 2 years after Mike Pence basically hung the president out to dry. And that's kind of everything that I have on the show tonight. That's everything I wanted to present to you guys. And again, happy Monday. We got a long week ahead of us, and we got to make sure that we're getting ready in 15 days, 2 weeks, whatever you want to call it, to get out to the polls. Make those votes count. And also, don't forget to please like and subscribe and hit the bell button to continue being part of the Lefty G experience. And remember, do me a favor, pass the show around to some other people. See if they like it. See if you can get them to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful night. Peace through strength. Good night, guys.